Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Your Friend in Furnishing. I'm your host, Marc Hostovsky. Today we are speaking with Brindy Bringhurst, founder of AirBrindy. There's a lot of really interesting nuggets in this episode. We talked about how even within the same state, different markets, you might want to take different furnishing approaches to different properties, even if they're like an hour or 2 hours away, just depending on that location. We walked through some examples of that. We also talked about the fact that sometimes reviews are not reliable, especially when they're on like much larger retail platforms, and how a good review might look good online, but when the product shows up, it's not quite on expectations, and some strategies you can take as a buyer to ensure you're always getting a quality product. And we did a deep dive on dining tables. It's just a fun episode overall, and we think you'll really enjoy listening. So without further ado, here's Brindy. Welcome, Brindy. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
Well, let's get into it. Tell us about AirBrindy. How did you get started here?
Yeah, I actually did get started a little bit as a designer, which is interesting to think about now because I don't really consider myself a designer anymore, even though I still and will always love interior design and curating furniture and decor pieces. But the way it started is I had a home that I purchased with full intent of living in the home full time, but was hit with some surprise bills that I wasn't expecting and needed to find a creative way to make ends meet. So had the brilliant idea of launching my home on Airbnb and was just going to rent it out while I was traveling or, staying with my parents. The only reason that I think I even felt the confidence to list my home on Airbnb was because I had done some of these things to make my home feel comfortable and cozy and had done these fun design elements. I did this really weird thing and painted a magenta pink triangle on one wall that was like a shower thought that I went all the way with, and it was a little odd, but it photographed well and it made it fun. And without even realizing it, I was already doing like a statement wall for Airbnb, years before that was something that people were turning to. So because I'd put all that effort into this design, it felt fun to share it with people. And I think had I not done that first, I don't know, it would have fallen into place like it did. And that was the first step for me.
I mean, your story is kind of similar. It's like the Airbnb dream story, which is have some space, rent it out. Very well aligned with like why the team started the business back when they did. And also, we're now in 2026, almost 9 years after you first listed your home on Airbnb. What's changed? I mean, for someone who's getting started, what in your observations has changed the most in that period of time? And what's some advice that you would give someone who's maybe where you were in 2017 and trying to get their own thing going?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's changed a lot in a lot of ways. I mean, at the core of it, it's exactly the same. It's people opening up their homes and spaces for people that are traveling. And so at its core, not a thing has changed. It's the types of things that appeal to guests. And I think just really the overall standard that hosts have to meet, that has changed. I mean, the bar has been raised in a lot of ways for hosts. And quite honestly, I don't think I could get away with what I got away with then now. My home was cute enough, but it was also, things like I didn't have nightstands in all of the bedrooms. I had some missing lamps. I was actually, my first 4-star review was because one of our guests, it was a group of older ladies, and she said she wanted a lamp next to every side of the bed, and I had a couple lamps that were missing. I took it very hard, but honestly, I think that was an important lesson, and never again will I host a home that has a missing bedside lamp. So there was a lot of things in that home that were just, looking back, it definitely makes me cringe a little bit. And I think for people listening that are just getting started now, a couple of things I would say, don't let those things hold you back, because you do have to start somewhere. And if I were doing it all over again, I would probably get a little bit more help than I did with some of that early design. I look back and I'm proud of myself for being scrappy, but also I might have been able to fast forward through some hard lessons and ultimately could have saved myself some money, could have earned more money a little bit quicker. So I think, to answer your question, what has changed? Guests expect a little bit more. And in order to really be competitive as a short-term rental, you need to stand apart from your competition. It is very true that the market is saturated just about everywhere. And I don't see that as doom and gloom. It just means that you really have to pay attention to standing apart. And that just wasn't really the case back in 2017 when I got started. My magenta triangle on the wall was enough to stand apart, and it's just not anymore. So Now there's more that you need to do, and you need to be strategic, because what works in one market isn't going to work in another market. And I look back at 2017, around that time, there was sort of just like this punch list that every short-term rental host was using, no matter where you were located, and it worked. And now I think it's you need to be a lot more thoughtful about your specific market, what guests in your area are looking for. And that checklist is going to vary quite a bit from place to place. And I think that's something that needs to be paid attention to, or you might struggle a little bit.
Can you give an example of that? Can you pick maybe, I mean, it seems like a lot of your properties are in Arizona, so different markets, but at least within the same state. But it's even
Yeah.
across those markets, like Scottsdale to Sedona to Phoenix, do you notice like those are all different markets and those checklists are also different?
Oh, yeah. Yep, for sure. For example, in Scottsdale, you have to have a pool. It's really difficult to earn the income that you want and to have it make sense with what home prices are and what expenses are in Scottsdale without having a pool, because the average home in Scottsdale has a pool. And it's usually not just a pool, it's a heated pool with other amenities, with a beautiful, backyard ambiance. And so if you don't have that, it's really tough. And so that's part of the basic punch list for, a successful short-term rental in Scottsdale. Now, even in Phoenix, really the entire Phoenix metro area, you need to have a pool. But even in some of the submarkets in Phoenix, you can get away a little easier without having a pool than you can, right in the core of Scottsdale. And then of course up in Sedona, I mean, a pool will always help you. I think that is true, but it's not a necessity. It's not near the necessity that it is, down in Phoenix and Scottsdale. And what I'm seeing, we have a couple homes that are in the mountains outside of Phoenix, and in those areas you really need a hot tub. You don't need a hot tub everywhere, but in those markets you really, really do. Being pet friendly, I think, is an amenity that sometimes is actually super important. Sometimes it's not. That's something that needs to be thought about for a specific market.
We like to do something called a category deep dive, where we'll ask you to just pick one product category and go really deep on sort of how do you think about buying the right product, what's important. So I'd love to hear you sort of pick something that you feel strongly about and just have a quick discussion about how you think about purchasing that product category for your rentals.
The one that comes to mind first is dining tables, dining chairs. And in full transparency, this is something I didn't think about, or how I have thought about it has evolved and matured over the years. And so this wasn't something that I emphasized in my early days. And so not every single one of our homes hits the, say requirement that I feel like I have moving forward whenever I'm adding a new home. But when you're shopping for a dining room table, this is a really key piece of furniture. And now it's actually a setting when you're setting up your Airbnb and verbal listing, like how many seats are at that table. And people care about that. If you have a home that sleeps 8 people, you want a dining table that has, 8 seats around that table. So it's tough sometimes, because sometimes homes, the way they're set up, it's really tricky to figure out how you're going to put that dining room table in there to fit the 8 seats that need to be there and have it still look good in photos and all of that. And then the other thing you want to think about too is it needs to be a good quality dining table, especially if it's in a home that's going to have a lot of traffic. I've had at least 2 dining room tables break, and it's a total pain, because when a dining room table breaks, it's not as simple as just like, oh, buy another dining table. You then have to think about, how do we get rid of that existing dining table? Of course, assembling the new dining table that's coming in and retrieving that package. So just making sure that you're getting a quality dining table from the get-go to avoid that whole fiasco. That is a lesson that I've learned the hard way. And then I think with chairs, if you're in a position that there just isn't enough space, have a large dining table to fit the number of people that need to sit at that table, you could do something where maybe you have a couple of chairs that they can put them away somewhere else in the house, and they can pull them to come sit at the table and make more space. And then if you're doing that, you're going to want to think about things like having stackable chairs, because finding places to stick chairs in the house is another hassle, and it can make a really nice home look cluttered. And filling all of your closet space with one-off chairs isn't a great solution either. So those are things that I have run into personally. So I do try and think about that when I'm setting up a home or working with an owner to set up a home.
Yeah, we worked with a company that aggregates and analyzes, specifically, I think Airbnb. I don't know if they do all these OTAs, but reviews. And one of the biggest contributors to negative reviews was dining or kitchen specs not lining up with the capacity of the house. So it's a house that sleeps 14, but it's a dining room table with 6 chairs. Or it's a house that sleeps 10, but they only have 6 plates, 6 bowls, 6 cups. Like that's something that really bothers people.
I think these are moments when in the early days of setting up a home where I was like, man, this is kind of hard. I guess this will do. And I think now it's, well, yeah, it is hard and, well, still have to problem solve until you find the right solution. I think that's been one of the hardest lessons I've learned is just the price you pay when a piece of furniture breaks. And of course, some of that's inevitable. I mean, you can buy a really
Yeah.
good quality item and it still breaks. This is just part of life.
What have you found like actually performs? I think you gave a good example earlier that this can be market by market, maybe pools in Scottsdale, maybe hot tubs in more mountainous regions. But what are things maybe if you get it right, you get a lot of positive comments from guests, or if you get it wrong, you're going to hear about it in reviews?
Yeah. So one thing that performed better than I expected was we did a pretty basic converted primary bedroom closet, walk-in closet, and turn it into kind of a little kid's den. And it's amazing how often that shows up in the reviews. I do think, I mean, this was something that we did maybe 4 years ago now. And right after we did it, it immediately started showing up in the reviews. I didn't even think we were hosting a whole lot of guests. One thing that was kind of frustrating about that is a home next to us then launched on an Airbnb. And what did they do? They launched with a walk-in closet that was strangely identical to ours. So that was a little annoying, but it was a good idea. As simple as it was, I mean, it was just one of those kids' teepees, foam kids play mat, basket with some stacking blocks. Very simple. It really resulted in reviews, and we get a lot more bookings from people with kids, and they'll say that that's why they're booking. So I think that's it. That, I mean, all in, we probably spent $250 on that. And I think, once again, if I was doing it again, I'd probably invest a little bit more, but still, that's a pretty easy lift for a solid return in the form of bookings and reviews.
You know, we've talked about a few different sort of like, frankly, like investments. Like you invest, I think this like kids room was an investment, making a pool is an investment, a nice dining room table is an investment. And also, you know, at the end of the day, these are businesses and it's really, it can be really scary investing, and it's very easy to overinvest also. And I think that's the fine line when you're thinking, especially across the portfolio and you're working, either it's an owned property or working with owners, like how do you think about helping them allocate, or you yourself allocating budget and investing in quality, but also making sure that it pencils at the end of the day?
Yeah, it is a tough balance to strike. And I find myself very often using the analogy, whether I'm talking to owners or my team, of, you know, it's like a bottle of wine. You don't really want bottom shelf, but you know, you probably don't need top shelf either. Like something just in between is a sweet spot that you want to find. And I think with short-term rentals, you really don't need to pay the premium for ultra brand name stuff. So just, you don't need to worry about that. So already that's going to, you know, cut down the expense pretty significantly if you're just not even looking at the real brand name stuff. You also want to avoid Amazon style furniture. That's another lesson I've learned the hard way so many times, where like I'll order a sofa from Amazon that strangely even has good reviews, and it shows up and it's like a mini sofa. That's what always happens with, I feel, Amazon furniture. It shows up and it's like, what is this? Is this a bed for ants? Like it doesn't even make sense. So I think that's a hard lesson that I've also learned, which is a total pain because you've now spent some money, you have to return it, total hassle to return those larger items. So you want to avoid the super cheap and you want to avoid the super expensive. And so I have found that finding a couple of brands that I really trust, it goes a long way, because if I can find those brands that hit that sweet spot, that aren't super cheap, you're not paying the premium for the brand name, that goes a long way. And then being able to recommend that to owners and just feel confident that, look, I haven't tried every single one of their products, but I know enough to know that anything you buy from this brand is probably going to be pretty good quality. And I do think that's where working with Minoan is awesome, because Minoan's already done part of that job of curating brands that work well for short-term rentals. But I found it when shopping with Minoan, my attention is drawn to brands that maybe I wouldn't have noticed otherwise, and get this opportunity to try a few things from the same brand, and then like, check, that gets my nod of approval. That's now on my list of places to recommend to owners. I think it also helps with that analysis paralysis. These days, I'm rarely designing a home myself from start to finish, but I am often helping an owner do so. So I do find myself recommending do's and don'ts.
You actually touched on something that I think is super valuable within there, which is like sometimes getting a good supplier is a better heuristic for quality than the reviews, especially when you're talking about
So true.
large retailers.
Article is one of my absolute favorites for that reason. And there's brands like them, and there's others too that if something does go wrong, they're good to fix it. They're good to make it
Yeah,
right.
right. They stand behind the quality. So
Yeah, that's a good
I'm glad
point.
you said that. That's like an interesting tip. Here, we'll go through the rapid fire questions if
Yeah,
that's all right.
I'm ready.
First one is, what is one product you think is wildly overrated in a rental?
Cornhole boards.
Cornhole board. Well, let's hear the justification.
Okay. So with that said, I do have them pretty much for all of my properties. The reason I feel like they're overrated is because sometimes hosts think that they can buy the cornhole board and immediately they've transformed their entire backyard. And that's not quite how it works. I love cornhole boards.
Yeah.
It's an easy, inexpensive game that you can add that guests love. I love cornhole myself, but it's not a one and done. Buy the cornhole board, but also buy the bistro lights and the hammock and invest in some landscaping. It's not just buy the cornhole board and voila, you've got a resort style
Yeah.
backyard.
What's one product category that people chronically under invest in, you think?
I would say dining table, but we spend a lot of time on that. So I will say mattresses. I mean, mattresses
Yeah.
are so important. And at the homes that we've invested in those, you see it in the reviews.
What about one product that always sparks joy?
A coffee station of some sort, a coffee station with a few extra amenities. You don't need to go crazy, but I think having a few options that are beyond just a Keurig is always something that guests appreciate.
What about unforever buy?
I think wall art. Wall art, I find myself just reusing wall art. It's a fun thing. You can keep it in the same home or you can repurpose it in other homes, give it new life. I feel very attached to most of my wall art.
And then what about one product you will always spend money on?
Pillows.
Yeah.
Pillows. Not an extreme amount because you can spend a ton of money on pillows, but gone are the days that I'm going to get like the 6-pack, of pillows for $40. Like that, those are just terrible pillows.
Yeah.
So just getting pillows and getting a few types that, guests can find their pillow comfort. That's something that's important for me.
Do you have a go-to pillow that you buy or
I
sort of?
do. Actually, Parachute which Parachute's a more expensive brand, and they have, it's been a few years, but they have a hospitality pack of pillows, and those are super solid and it's a very fair price. So that is one that I do like. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Brindy. I feel like you've seen Minoan since the beginning, seen us grow, and it's been fun working with you and watching your growth along the way, and really good, solid advice. This is a really valuable one for folks, not even folks who are just getting started, like anyone who's hosting. I think you've shared some really insightful stuff. So appreciate you making the time and coming on the show with us.
Yep, happy to. And always loved working with Minoan, and you guys are awesome. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate that.